So here's our chamfer. It's 45 degrees, 5/16. However, our stretcher is actually coming in about 30 degrees off of that line. And so we have to figure a way to put it in the mortising machine essentially tipped at 30 degrees. And so what I did was I took 2 blocks of wood and I set my saw blade for 45 and I cut out the spot for the leg, right? And then I cut the sides of these at 30 so it tipped it, and I cut the bottom across so it would sit flat in my mortising machine. So now I can set this in my mortising machine, clamp it up, and mortise in and it'll automatically cut it at the proper angle, right? It's pretty simple. So you're just figuring out a way to tip this thing 30 degrees out of plumb, essentially, right? And so once you figure that out, it's a question of just marking out, doing the layout of your stretcher to figure out where you're going to actually do the cut. So the way these fit in, they just slide in like that. And the beauty of that is, see, the problem with this table is you have to glue up the stretchers and the skirts at the same time. The way they made these in Portsmouth, this is a whole different assembly, and they had a little iron fitting under here, and it just slid up the leg. And they fastened it to an iron fitting. But Townsend, he was like, that wasn't good enough for him. Everything's got to fit together, right? So this way, there's no shoulder to miss. You just true up your table, glue it up, put these in, and if it has to slide in or out a little bit to get everything to fit, no problem. So that's a really good side effect of having no shoulder. It's a lot easier to fit. It's a bridle joint or a half flap joint. And you remember how we made the drawer dividers in our Townsend box, where it's a square bottom dado and you push the thing in and you mark a little notch and then you just on the end and you push it? This is exactly what this is. All right? Think of it that way. So this is the piece, the top piece with the notch cut in it. This piece you push up into it, just bare-face up against it, you mark it and cut it. This is a very handy rig. It's a protractor, a starred protractor, but you want the one where the blade goes right through the middle of the body, because the other type where the blade just runs on the flat side, right? And so this one, this is essentially half of this, right? But this is good because you can flip it around all different sides. This one's really only good for one face. So what you do is you set your protractor to 60, check it off your layout, because if your table, for some reason your table is slightly different dimension than mine, you may have a slightly different angle there. So I set this for 60, right there. So I laid one on there and I marked where my drawing came across, so I knew where the joint was going to be. All right. And so that's where I'd start. So you start in the middle, right? And so you take your now I made some little tick marks, so I've got some pencil marks here so I know where to start my joint. All right, so there's 60 degrees there, and then I'm just going to mark my thickness of my other piece on here. And there's 60 degrees there. So I've got the spot where it's going to cross on there marked out, right? So then I'll take my square. I want to connect these lines down the sides. Is going to be the one that has the top continuing straight across and just the notch on either side, because I'm going to mark the other one from this one once I make it. So what I learned from the information I got from Winterthur is that these miters don't meet in the middle. It's not like this miter comes in from this side and hits the middle and this hits the middle, because if you did that you'd have nothing left and it would be two pieces. So you've got to back your miter away so you have a continuing bit of wood. Well, let me use this one so you can see it better. You need to just cut out a third. Your miter has to take a third of the material from either side so that you have this fin I just eyeballed it, but I guessed thirds as far as what my miter was going to be. So I'm just going to eyeball that into pretty much thirds, right? And I'll do it down here too. I'm trying to figure out where my miters are going to be and how big the fin is I have to leave in there. Okay. All right? Yeah. And so only the top 1/8 of an inch is going to have the miters in it. Again, it's like the divider in your Townsend box. You push it in from behind, yeah. You leave it full depth, and then you just notch the last little bit, and that pushes all the way. So I'm going to take my marking gauge. I'm going to put a mark on here on the amount that I'm going to leave to make my miter. So let me make this a little bit bigger. And it's not super critical how much you leave, but you want a small enough amount so that it's easy to cut by hand and not have to worry about the angle. So I've made a mark here just below my top. That's as far as my dado is going to go, and then my dado is going to stop. Right. So below this, I'm going to dado this out.
Because then you're going to go up and do the miter.
Right, and so that's where the miter is going to occur, and that last little bit up here. Now I have to divide this piece in half because this is a half lap, and so each piece is going to have half of it cut away so that the other piece can notch into it, right? So then I have to establish approximately half of this thing. So use the Breed Simple system again here. Set my marking gauge to that so I know how far up to cut. And so this mark I'm going to use to mark both pieces. So I'm going to mark up from the bottom. That's going to be my halfway point. There. Mark it on my corresponding piece while I've got this going. So now I have to remove the wood down here. That's going to go away completely, I think. And then I'm going to have my little fin coming up there. So that's going to go. So I cut close to my line. So now I'll chop to my line.
So you just cut in a 30-second or something?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'll cut to the line with my saw, but I kind of like the surface that you get with a chisel. These are these, you want a pretty thin paring chisel. Go to your line. Well, it looks pretty good. Then I'll clean up to my halfway mark. Like that. So I've cut half of it away. So when my other piece comes up in here, it's going to slide up in there, right? So let me have a look and make sure there's nothing keeping anything here. And you know, the trouble is that this stretcher is only 5/16, and so you know, you're just taking minute amounts of wood away, really. So I'm going to take this section below the part that's going to be my miter in here. I'm going to take this a third of the way to the other side. I'm going to take this a third of the way down. And so it's going to be a recessed sort of angled dado, and I'm going to leave a third of my material there. So what I'm going to do in advance here is I'm going to set a router plane for that depth. so that once I get close, I can get in there with a router plane and clean it up. Because you want to make sure that it's a pretty good tight fit, because you know, the glue in this case is going to make this thing strong again once you put it together.